Hello everyone, it's Jessica. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to show you how I created this cute little card, which actually came together almost by accident because I was playing around with the smooshing technique on a piece of paper, and I created this really pretty pink background. And I'd also been playing around with blending some colors with my Distress Oxide inks, and then I'd stamped these flowers over top of them. And when I was done, I just really couldn't let all those pretty pieces of paper go to waste, and so I threw them together into this card, and the result, I think, turned out really cute. So I'm going to show you how I did this so that you can recreate this as well. Now, some of the things that I used to make this card, I used the stitched square thin cut, which is going to be that piece behind the flowers, but you could always just cut it as a regular square piece of paper. I did use the February stamp of the month from Close to My Heart called Doodled Borders, and it does have this one sentiment on it. It's got a bunch of like really cute little borders and doodles and things like that, but there is one sentiment that says love, joy, happiness, XO, and so I used that sentiment down at the bottom. I also used these two stamp sets together. Now here's the really cool thing. This stamp set has been around for a little while, and I believe it is still available. It's called Stitched Florals, and it by itself is a really pretty stamp set. It does come with some thin cuts that you can use to cut those shapes out. Now here's the neat part. This is a newer stamp set called Counting My Blessings, and this flower, and this leaf actually match the thin cuts that go along with the other stamp set. So even though there aren't thin cuts that go directly with this entire stamp set, you can borrow the ones from the Stitched Florals and use them to cut out those flowers. But you could always, you know, stamp in any sort of flower stamp that you've got and then fussy cut out as well. But I really love how those two work together. So the other things that we are going to be using are some Distress Oxide inks, because that's how we're going to create this really pretty pink background here. Now, as far as I can tell, honestly, I think the technical term is smooshing, which is kind of silly, right? But you'll see why it's called the smooshing technique. And so I'm going to show you how to make this, and then in a separate technique, I'm going to show you how to color in these other floral pieces that we're going to use to put together with the rest of our card. Okay? All right, so you'll need a couple of colors here. The ones that I use, but of course you can use whatever you like. I used picked raspberry for my background, and then spiced marmalade and mustard seed for my flowers. And then I'm going to show you how you can also use your regular stamp pads to at least do a little bit of blending. You won't be able to do that smooshing technique, but to do the blending and the coloring, I used my Sweet Leaf ink pad, just Close to My Heart ink pad, which is not a Distress Oxide ink. Okay, and so those are the things that we're going to need. The other tools you will need, and these are also really technical, guys, you're going to need a piece of plastic. Okay, I like to use a plastic bag because then I put my hand in it and it keeps my hand clean, and then I can grab it, and I find that that's really easy to work with. But some sort of plastic, even if it's a flat piece that you can kind of pick up and do something like this. But I recommend like a plastic bag, so even a sandwich bag or something, and then some way that you can get some water. So honestly, I grabbed this out of our bathroom because it's something that we use for our daughter's hair. It's just literally a water bottle. So you could have a cup of water or a water brush that you can squeeze water out of, or just something to have a little bit of water, okay? All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna show you how to do this. I'm gonna set aside my paper just for a second here. And so the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to take our Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to put it down on my all-purpose mat here. Now, if you don't have an all-purpose mat, these are awesome because they're very easy to clean up and they work perfectly for projects like this. But again, you could just put down some sort of like plastic tablecloth or some kind of plastic, something that will be easy for you to clean up and work with. So I'm just going to put some ink down on my all-purpose mat here, okay? And you can see it didn't leave a whole lot of ink, but that's okay, that's plenty. And then I'm going to take my water, and I'm just, oh, I didn't turn my nozzle enough. I'm just gonna add a little bit of water. I don't even need very much, okay? And now the cool thing about Distress Oxide inks is that they do react with water. And when you create it this way, you're really kind of creating a paint of sorts, if you will, okay? And so I put my hand in my plastic bag, and I'm just going to mix that water and that Distress Oxide ink together. and I'm going to pick it up on my bag and then touch it down onto my paper. So that's where the smooshing name comes from, I think, because you're just literally like smooshing the color down with your piece of plastic or packaging. And then even I could just kind of touch it up and down, very carefully picking my hand up and down to create those blotches, but I could also kind of slide, right, and create a different sort of look. So that's the fun thing about this technique, is that you can create whatever sort of background that you want and how messy you want it to look, how much color you want it to have, like that, okay? So that part is done. Give me a second here to clean this up so that we don't get it all over the rest of our project. I'm just using, I usually use my chamois, my stamp chamois, or like a baby wipe is fine. And hold on, let me use my sleeve here. I forgot to grab a paper towel to have handy to dry off my surface. Okay, there we go. Now, since I am doing this as a video, I am not going to take the time to do this right now, but normally what I would do is grab my heating tool and just kind of heat set this and make sure that my paper is dry, okay? But I'll just go ahead and move on and show you what the next step is. Now, if you look on my card on this peak background, you can see that there's a little bit more color than what I was left with in the smooshing technique. So if I wanted to, I could leave my background just like this. But I liked it just a little bit darker, and so I wanted to add a little bit more color. So again, I'm going to take my Picked Raspberry Distressed Oxide ink. I'm going to grab my mini ink blending tool. And a cool little trick that I saw somebody else using to store the foam heads for the mini ink blending tool, especially as you start to get a bunch of colors, is just to put them in a little tiny plastic baggie. I picked up like a pack of 100 of them for like $5 on Amazon. And so I have more plastic baggies than I will ever be able to use, but that worked really perfectly. All right, so I'm just going to get some ink loaded onto my sponge here, and then I'm going to very lightly in a circular motion just come over where I had made those splotches. And you can still see that smooshing technique that I had done on the paper. It's gonna show through. Really, I'm just adding a little bit more color to the background of it, okay? And so it's just another layer. It looks really cool. And like I said, you could have left it as it was the first time around, or you could do it like this and get a little bit more on it if you wanted a richer, more saturated color. Okay, and I don't want it all to be uniform. I actually kind of like it having some different shades, or I guess depths of color to it, so some lighter, some darker. And so I think I'm going to do about like that, and I could probably even get maybe 2 squares out of this. Might be able to get 2 squares. Maybe I should have splotched just a little bit more on my paper. Okay, all right, so that part is done. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is you could always add a couple of other splatters of color if you like. I am a big fan of splattering my shimmer brush on top of my work. And now, oh, where'd my clear shimmer brush go? It's hiding on me, of course. Oh, here it is. Sorry, not where I put it. Well, I guess it was where I put it, just not where I remembered putting it. All right, so I'm going to take my shimmer brush and shake it up. Get that ink mixed and make sure I've got some good flow coming out of my pen here. This is a new one, so it might take a second. There we go, okay. All right, so I've got a nice juicy pen, and I'm going to flick it over my background. And since this is clear, you won't really see it that much, but it will add a nice little sparkle to the background. You could also do this in a color too. All right, and we're gonna let that dry, and then I'll go ahead and speed things up to show you the rest of the card. Okay, so off camera, I did take my heating tool and make sure that that paper was nice and dry because I didn't want to adhere anything to it while the paper was still wet. Now I am going to pull out my mustard seed blending foam head for my mini ink blending tool, and I'm just going to come over on the other piece of that side of that paper, and I'm just going to create a yellow background and kind of smear it around and make sure that I've given myself enough room to cut out 3 flowers from this yellow area. And then I come in with the spiced marmalade and just create a little spot that could be basically the center of the flower. And then I go back over it again in mustard seed to make sure that those colors are nicely blended. And then the other thing I'm going to need to do is to create some green for my leaves. Now, we've been using Distress Oxides up to this point, but I want to show you how you can actually use your actual close to my heart ink pads to do this coloring as well. You won't be able to make that splotch smooshing technique with your close to my heart inks, but you can do this coloring. So I just again put it on my mini ink foam tool, and I just created a sweet leaf background for my leaves. Now here you can see once I've created those backgrounds, I just put my thin cuts on top and I cut them out, and here you can see all of the cuts I was able to get out of those parts of that paper. I had a little bit of extra space on my pink, so I cut out some pink flowers that I might use on a later project. The cool thing about the stitched square thin cut is that it does also cut out a frame. So again, I set those to the side, and perhaps I will use them on a later project. So now that I've got my backgrounds of my flowers and my leaves, I need to go ahead and stamp the outline of them, and I'm going to do that in my intense black ink. Now, anytime you are doing anything that involves liquid or wetness, you know, so markers or watercolor pencils or shimmer brushes or the Distress Oxide inks, it's always best to use the intense black ink because that's going to be your best ink for not smearing. Now, I could have gone right over my sweet leaf leaves, also a sweet leaf, and gotten a really subtle tone-on-tone look, but I wanted my outline of my leaves to be not black and to be just a little bit darker green. So I had that Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide sitting right there on my desk, and I just grabbed that and stamped it with that. All right, we are ready to start the assembly of this card. I apologize for putting my head in the shot. It is sometimes really hard to see what you're doing without sticking your head right in front of the camera. So we're just going to take that stitch square and adhere it to the front of our card base. And then what I do is I just spend a little bit of time laying out where I think the leaves are going to go, because I want them to be poking out from underneath those 3 flowers that we are going to create in a cluster. And so I'm just really sort of eyeballing here to make sure. And then I don't want any of that pink corner to be showing in the bottom right hand side. So ultimately I'm going to try to slide those leaves down just a little bit so that when I put those 3 flowers in a cluster that you can't see them. Now the first flower is down just with adhesive, and then as you can see I put those top 2 flowers with a little bit of foam tape with some of the leftover foam squares I had from a circle shaker window. And then now our card flower cluster is complete. Okay, so next we need to add those little dark, they almost look like ink splatters, if you will, and I did those in black. And again, coming in with that Counting My Blessings stamp set, there are 2 of them on there. One's a little bit bigger than the other one. I grabbed the bigger one, and then I just went around in those nooks and crannies of the flowers where the cluster is, and I just stamped that down. And I think that just gives it a little something special and extra. Okay, next we have to do the butterfly. And so I'm going to do this now and then set it aside, because one thing to know about the Distress Oxide inks, you can stamp in them just like you can with a regular ink pad, but it is a pigment ink that sits on top of the paper, and so it takes a little bit longer to dry. So that's why I stamped those, and then I set them aside before fussy cutting the butterfly out, because I wanted to make sure it was good and dry. So in the meantime, I just moved back to my card to finish putting some things together. Here I've grabbed my Icicle color of the Stickles, and I'm just adding a little bit of sparkle to the center of my flowers. And then I also need to stamp my sentiment from the February stamp of the month, Doodled Borders, and it says love, joy, happiness, XO, and I just stamped that in black underneath my card right there. And the other thing I realized I forgot until the very end, and I had to do it off camera, is on my original card I did have that little heart up there as well, and so I stamped that later. But here you can see I fussy cut out that butterfly after giving him a few minutes to dry, and then I just put it on there, and then basically the card is done. All right, guys, I hope you had fun watching, and I appreciate you stopping by to create with me today. Have a wonderful crafty day. Bye.